By fountains, by fishes. Big Bill Beasley ran the whetstone down the edge of his blade, every rasp echoing round the campfire like a scream. He'd spent the morning sharpening his bill, a break for lunch, and now he was starting on his bollock dagger. It was getting on Jocelyn's nerves. Every scrape felt like fingers down a blackboard. "Are you going to do that all day?" she snapped, her voice dripping with scorn. "Aye," Bill replied, not even bothering to look up. He followed that up with, "Reckon I might and all," in between two more rasps with the whetstone. "What in virtue's name for? There's no sign of 'em. They're all holed up. They ain't coming. The swamp's as quiet as a mill pond on a still day." It was true. Following orders from on high, they'd been laying low in Breakersland for weeks now. The plan was to keep out of sight, and then hit the Attoon when they got an opportunity. Good plan. Only problem was the bloody Attoon weren't playing ball. "Constant tapping breaks the stone," Bill responded. He looked about to run the stone again, and then thought better of it and looked up. "Friends of mine from Neep's Heath are looking to get a piece of that raid folks you're talking about. If there's a chance to make good money and clobber the Attoon while we're at it, I'm in." "Ah, you feckin' idiot. We ain't getting no orders to go running off into some harebrained raid in Yatoon lands. We'll be stuck here in these bloody swamps." Jocelyn pointed a hand at the surrounding marshes. She didn't need to point in a particular direction. "Ah, you will be, Joss, but come the spring equinox my 2 years are up. I get my warrants and I get to keep my weapons and armour. So I reckon you'll be stuck here, Joss, but not me. I've always wanted to see what those Yatoon lands were like." Big Bill Beasley's voice trailed off as he waited for Jocelyn to respond. When nothing came, he picked up his whetstone and resumed the work. Best to be ready, after all. Overview. For decades, the Attoon Orcs have raided the Empire's western borders, bands of warriors pressing deep into the border territories, looking for some battle opportunities to loot wealth and take thralls. Sometimes these raids are a prelude to an invasion, probing the Empire's defences, dowsing for any weakness their armies might exploit. Sometimes the raids are a feint, designed to draw the Empire's forces away to allow a full-scale attack elsewhere. Turnabout is fair play, as the Marcher proverb has it, and it's long past time to bloody the Jarl's noses. Getting in. The Marcher National Assembly has urged the people of their nation to prepare for a raid against the Yatoon territory of Skalon. With the aid of allies in Wintermark and Navarre, preparations are being made for the assault to follow the spring Equinox summit. A raid on Skalon is a dangerous proposition. The Yatoon are a highly militant people. They keep large standing garrisons on their major settlements. They have watchtowers and beacons. Raiding the Yatoon is just an order of magnitude more difficult than raiding the Druge, the Thule, or even the Grendel. The Marchers and their allies can expect to face fierce resistance from every Yatoon warrior they encounter and outright hostility and opposition from every Orc thrall. And that assumes that they can even get there. Reaching Skalon would be easy if the Empire held western Semersuak, but half of that territory is in Yatoon hands. A handful of military units could easily slip through the Yatoon lands, even if scores of them could get through, but not without being noticed. Not without the alarm being given. Not without warning every Jarl in the Kirst that the Empire was coming. A better option would be to sail to Skalon if possible. The Marcher Assembly overwhelmingly backed the judgment of Jacob Tanner, calling on the people of Breakersland to use their boats to help with the raid. There are countless coracles and skiffs in Breakersland. Most are far too small to be of any use, but a few folk own a fishing vessel that could transport people, and they are all ready to do so. There is also a small fleet of Marcher fishing vessels at Odds End. But even together, there just aren't enough decent-sized ships to transport a force of warriors to Skalon the size of being talked about. In addition, the Wintermark Assembly, backed by the judgment of Marit Suvidatir, with a greater majority, urging any winterfolk who can offer aid to their endeavour. The people of Westerol have pledged their fleet of fishing ships to the raid. If these fleets abandon all attempts to fish this season and devote themselves to smuggling the Imperial warriors to Skalon, then the raid is just possible. What would make a bigger difference, though, is if captains of independent fleets committed to help with the raid. It will not be easy. There is no tradition of naval raiding in the Gullet. Neither Wintermark nor the Marchers have much expertise with it, and none of the ports are large enough to facilitate large numbers of soldiers embarking and disembarking. but a fleet is much more useful than a fishing vessel. Of course, the Marchers may get help from other nations. The Freeborn and some of the other nations in the Bay of Katazar put a big emphasis on naval combat, but their fleets are a long way away and will take time to reach the Gullet. Any Imperial fleet can support the raid, but fleets from nations that don't have any port on the Gullet, that is everyone except Wintermark and the Marchers, will take a 1-rank penalty to the effectiveness when contributing to the raid. We, the Marcher Assembly, call upon the fisherfolk and eel farmers of Bregersland to harness their knowledge of boating to add additional deckhands to the fleets of the Marchers as they raid Hordaland. Do not fear to act, only be ashamed by inaction. Jacob Tanner, Winter 383, Year of the Empire, upheld. Primacy 124-0. Where are we going? The Marcher National Assembly can choose to direct their champions to engage military, economic or spiritual targets. The Empire has a completed map of Skalon, but it has come too late to allow the prognosticators to make the kind of detailed preparations they made for previous raids. To make effective use of the map, the Empire will need to be more flexible in the targets they attack. Unlike similar raids that have taken place in the past, the Civil Service don't have enough information to prepare a detailed briefing on 2 or 3 different options that the Marchers could attack, analysing what could be accomplished. In any case, because the Imperial forces will be spread out across Skalon, it would be incredibly difficult to coordinate them all to come together to attack a single town or settlement. Instead, the best plan the Civil Service can devise is for the Marchers to adopt a completely flexible approach. The Civil Service recommends that the Marcher Assembly issue clear guidance in the form of a statement of principle, laying out clearly which kinds of targets to hit. They might recommend that the soldiers infiltrating Skalon might target the military facilities, raid the economic infrastructure, or focus their attacks on the Yattun's sacred sites. The Empire has recently constructed a spy network in Skalon, and by the time of the next summit, they will have the first reports back on the territory. Commanders of military units who supported the spy network will have valuable information on key locations that could be struck, as well as a map of the surrounding geography which is essential. Every Imperial hero who is contemplating taking part in the raid would be well advised to get a copy of the map. It will be crucial to the success of the raid once they get to Skalon. But the map will come too late for the Civil Service to make extensive analyses of the territory to allow them to provide a definitive list of individual targets as they have done in previous raids. Instead, the prognosticators advise a more flexible approach to take advantage of the information the map provides once the raid is underway. From the rudimentary information the Empire has from spies so far, they know that Skalon is a rich, prosperous territory. There are rumours of Bourse resources, and it is the seat of Ustigar, the Jarl of Kierheim, who is said to be the wealthiest of all the Yattun Jarls. Old reports from previous conflicts in Skalon describe a land dotted with temples. The Yattun build enormous shrines to their gods, called Kirkir, that are overlooked by their Godi. These Yattun priests have considerable status and influence in the Yattun society, acting as advisors and guides to the Jarls. It is also a certainty that the territory will have numerous important military targets. The Yattun are a highly militant nation. They field more armies than any other barbarian nation, and sustaining that level of force requires massive investment in mines, forges and smithies, and the other infrastructure needed to outfit and arm warriors for battle. As a consequence, the prognosticators are able to provide some insight into what the impact of each of the 3 different flavours of the raid might be. Consequences. The outcome of the raid depends on whether primarily it targets military, economic or religious targets. The impact of the raids will be determined by the total strength of the fleets and military units assigned to the raid. There are 3 possible options for the raid: to attack military, economic or religious targets. The Marcher Assembly can choose one of these 3 options by passing a statement of principle through the Marcher Assembly to guide the raiders. If more than one contradictory statement passes, then the one with the greatest margin in its favour will take effect. Whatever option the Assembly plumps for, every military unit will acquire significant wealth from the raid, mostly in the form of valuable metals such as green iron, orichalcum and wet silver, but also small quantities of beggar's lie, iridescent gloaming and ambergelt. They may even be able to seize some of the Yattun's most valuable commodities, potentially allowing some of the military units to come away with mithril, white granite, weirwood or ilium. Taking part. A military unit can be assigned to take part in the Raid of Skalon by selecting Raid Skalon from the Independent Action option during downtime. As this is a raid in which military units are expected to spread out across the territory, enchantments that affect paid work, such as Shroud of Mist and Shadow, will be effective. Military. Steel Weaver's Crucible. Targeting military facilities will damage the Attune ability to provide emergency aid to build and resupply armies. Initial reports from the scouts who have been spying on Skalon mention the Steel Weaver's Crucible, a vast forge at the foot of a great mountain. Apparently, the smoke rises from the forges day and night as the thralls labour to produce weapons and armour for the Attune armies. The master of the Crucible is said to be a living statue, 6 foot tall and cast from bronze with 4 arms. Each arm is so strong that it can wield a blacksmith's hammer, and the statue works tirelessly, beating mithril to fashion 4 weapons at a time. Doubtless, this extraordinary sight is simply the most notorious of its kind in Skalon. If the raiders are encouraged to target military infrastructure, they can attempt to locate the Steel Weaver's Crucible and other forges, smithies, tanneries and similar, all of which are used to produce vital weapons and armour with which to equip the Attune armies. If the Marchers and their allies seek out military targets, if they look for Steel Weaver's Crucible and other facilities like it, then they can inflict significant damage on the Attune war machine. In this case, the Imperial prognosticate that for every 10,000 points of military strength that are assigned to the raid, the Attune will be unable to carry out emergency resupply or raise a new army for a season. This means that if the total strength is 20,000 force, then the effect will last 2 seasons. If it is 30,000, then the effect will last for 3 seasons, and so on. Economic. Kierheim. Targeting economic infrastructure will damage the Attune ability to build and repair their fortifications. Kierheim is almost as famous as Savos or Tsato. Said to be the closest thing the Attune have to a city, the walled town is the seat of Uthaskelf, one of their wealthiest and most cunning jarls, who is said to have the ear of both the king of Nakirst and the queen of Kalsi. The port town is known to be heavily fortified, but those who have visited it say that it has a stark beauty to it. In the centre of the town, directly in front of the Jarl's keep, there is apparently a series of great fountains built by Uthaskelf's father, each of which is filled with exotic fish of every imaginable colour. Kierheim is wealthy, there is no doubt about that, but it is well defended. There might well be easier targets the Empire could attack that are just as rich. If the Marchers and their allies seek out economic targets, if they risk attacking Kierheim and other settlements like it, then they can inflict significant damage on the Attune economy. In this case, the Imperial prognosticators calculate that for every 10,000 full points of military strength that are assigned to the raid, the Attune will be unable to build or provide emergency repair to any of their fortifications for a season. This means that if the total strength is 20,000 force, then the effect will last 2 seasons. If the effect is 30,000, then it will last for 3 seasons, and so on. Spiritual. Uthaskelf. Targeting sacred sites will cause the champions of the Attune to pull back to defend them. Allegedly, the sacred temple of Uthaskelf lies somewhere to the north of Kierheim, if such a place really exists. According to the legends, this is where Ulven, the oldest of the Attune fair, died. The Attune claim that Ulven was so strong that even the bottomless sea could not drown her. So when she felt her strength fading, she went north to seek out the belly of the world, the Umphalos, the point where the howling abyss meets the mortal world. She finally found out what she was looking for in Uthaskelf, but it was buried beneath the stone, so she tore the mountain apart with her bare hands. From the rocks she fashioned a bridge to carry her and her followers over the abyss. Those who were too scared to cross, fearing the wails of anguish that emanated from the abyss, became the first thralls. Obviously, that's a preposterous story, but the temple at Uthaskelf is real. If the Marchers and their allies seek out religious targets, if they attack the Kirkja and Uthaskelf if they can find it, then it will threaten the power of the Godi in Attune lands. As a result, All the independent Yatun champions, the banners that support their armies, in much the same way that Imperial military units support Imperial armies, will be recalled. These groups are known to operate with the support and aid of the Kirkia, and they will be called back to Skalon to protect them. In this case, the Imperial prognosticators calculate that for every 10,000 full points of military strength that are assigned to the raid, the Yatun will be unable to field any Orc champions for a season. This means that if the total strength is 20,000 force, then the effect will last 2 seasons. If it is 30,000, then the effect will last for 3 seasons, and so on. The civil service caution that the Yagara and other human champions do not worship the Yatun gods, and as such they will not be recalled. Only the Yatun Orc champions will return to protect their temples. Rewards. Military units and fleets that take part in the raid will receive metals and forest materials in place of their normal production. Some military units may be able to claim bourse resources. The rewards for the raid should be excellent. Skalon is a rich territory, and part of the point of the raid is to make off with the enemy's resources. A starting military unit can expect to receive rewards equal to 2 ingots of green iron, wet silver and orichalcum, as well as 4 more random metals and 4 more random natural materials. Upgraded or enchanted military units will receive proportionately more. In addition, Skalon has valuable bourse resources. Normally, such resources would be gathered up by the civil service and handed over to whoever has been appointed to lead the raid. But here, all military units are being encouraged to act independently, to attack when the best opportunity presents itself. As a result, whatever loot each military unit acquires will be their own, and there will be no possible way the civil service or anyone else can tell what they have acquired. Not everyone will be lucky enough to get an opportunity to grab bourse materials, but the civil service prognosticators calculate that for every 10,000 full points of military strength assigned to the raid, the Empire will be able to loot 10 random bourse resources, wains of white granite, weirwood, or mithril, or rings of ilium. Who is lucky enough to grab a bourse resource will be entirely random. Some citizens will get lucky, and some won't. Fleets will also be able to support the raid. They will receive equivalent rewards, although the penalty for fleets from other nations other than Wintermark or the Marches will apply to their rewards as well. Fleets will not be in a position to gather any bourse materials. Getting out. Escaping Skalon presents a significant challenge. Depending on how much military strength is committed, the raid risks stretching the military infrastructure of the entire Empire. The impact of the raid may be felt by every military unit in the Empire. It is one thing to get into Skalon, getting out is another matter. Once a wave of attacks starts across the territory, the Yatun will quickly go on high alert. It will very quickly become impossible for the Marchers and their allies to get out the same way they got in. The fishing vessels can smuggle the military units into the territory if no one is expecting them, but the Yatun will be guarding the shorelines once they realise what is happening. At that point, it will be practically impossible for the soldiers to sneak past them to reach the boats. Fortunately, there is another way out of Yatun lands. The Navarre Assembly, backed by the judgment of Corey Wayfarer with a greater majority, urging any Navarre who can to offer aid to their strategy. The Marchers have their beaters, and the Highborn have their unconquered, but no nation in the Empire can rival the Navarre for their ability to lead a group of people through enemy territory. Before the Empire was formed, the Navarre Striding spent decades picking their way through hostile territory, finding ways to avoid patrols and evade authorities. Even now, that most Stridings confine their wanderings to the Empire's borders, there are still those Navarre who pride themselves on walking the trods as far as they can go, regardless of who controls the lands they are passing through. With the help of the Navarre scouts and pathfinders, the Empire's heroes can slip over the border of Skalon into Semasuak, and once there find their way through enemy lines to the regions controlled by the Empire. Of course, the Yatun will know what is happening by that point. Their armies will be on high alert, and they will have patrols out searching for the Empire's forces. But it won't matter if there are encounters between Yatun and Imperial soldiers by that point. Not once the raids are over and everyone is leaving Skalon. It's too late then for the Yatun commanders to warn anyone about what is happening. Even with the help of the Navarre, it won't be easy. The grim reality is that though there will be a lot of fighting in Skalon, the more people will be lost trying to slip through the Atoon's lines than attacking the Atoon. Such is the way of war. The more people that go, the more Imperial casualties there will be. The Imperial prognosticators calculate that if the total military strength on the raid is less than 20,000, then there won't be any long-term impact. If the total force from fleets and military units is over 20,000 but under 30,000, then every single military unit in the Empire will suffer a 1-rank penalty for a season, reflecting the difficulty in replacing so many lost soldiers in such a short space of time. That penalty increases by 1 rank for every 10,000 full points of military strength above 10,000. This means that it will be a 1-rank penalty between 20 and 30,000, a 2-rank penalty between 30 and 40,000, and so forth. There are some ways this penalty could be ameliorated. The key problem for the Empire's military units isn't getting out of Skalon, it's crossing Atoon Hill territory in Semisuak. If the Empire can wrest control of one or more of the regions that border the Atoon lands, that will make it easier for the soldiers to get back safely. The prognosticators calculate that if the Empire is to gain control of either Suak Wastes or Stark by the end of the upcoming campaign season, then this will reduce the penalty by 1 rank to a minimum of 0. If the Empire is able to gain control of Tanikapari by the end of the season, this will also reduce the penalty by 1 rank to a minimum of 0. Both effects are cumulative. Opting out. The National Assembly of a nation may urge their people not to take part in the raid. This will protect their nation from the fallout of the raid at the price of extending the effects on other nations. A nation whose assembly opts out of the raid will have greatly reduced effectiveness if they still take part. The other way a nation might avoid suffering the consequences of the Skalon raid is if the National Assembly calls on their people to disavow any participation in it. Any National Assembly could pass the following mandate. Wisdom teaches us to despise folly and chastise those who spread it. This raid is folly, and we send named priest with 15 liao to chastise any military captains who contemplate joining it. Synod mandate, any National Assembly. If a National Assembly endorses this mandate, then any military units or fleets that go on the raid will be 50% less effective, receive 50% less rewards, and be unable to acquire any rare resources. But their nation will not suffer any penalty from the raid. However, that just means the burden of the losses will fall more heavily on the other nations. If 3 or more nations disavow the raid, then the penalty on the remainder will last for 2 seasons. If 6 or more nations endorse the mandate, the penalty will last for 3 seasons. If 9 nations refuse to support the raid, then the penalty will last for a year. If all 10 nations pass the mandate, then support for the raid will collapse and the option will no longer be available. Rafael Izamora Irequeza has asked the Freeborn Assembly to pass the following alternative mandate. While raiding is a proud tradition of the Brass Coast, vigilance calls to protect those you care about above all else. We send, named priest, with 15 liao to encourage the military captains of the Brass Coast to follow the example of Guerra and liberate all those who held unwillingly in Feroz, instead of raiding for profit. Synod mandate, Brass Coast Assembly. If this mandate is passed, it would have the identical effect listed above for freeborn military units. Any freeborn military units or fleets that go into that raid will be 50% less effective and receive 50% less rewards, and be unable to acquire any rare resources, but their nation will not suffer any penalty from that raid. Nathair Autumngale has asked the Navarre Assembly to pass a different mandate. Sacrifice is both our hearth magic and our aspiration to pride. We should recognise the sacrifices made by Freeborn in ceding Feroz, whose people now need our aid. We send named priest with 15 doses of liao to encourage the Navarre military captains recovering from combating the Valorn, not to go raiding in Skalon, but to support the rescue and extraction of those trying to escape Feroz. Synod mandate, Navarre Assembly. If this mandate is passed, it would have the identical effect listed above for Navarre military units. Any Navarre military units or fleets that go on the raid will be 50% less effective, receive 50% less rewards, and be unable to acquire any rare resources. but their nation will not suffer any penalty from the raid. A special alternative mandate is available to the Varushkan National Assembly, should they wish to focus the attention of the nation on the Ossium problem. Complications. Conjunctions. 3 conjunctions of the Sentinel Gate have been identified that offer complications and opportunities to Imperial heroes. To complicate matters, the Civil Service prognosticators have identified 3 large conjunctions at the coming Equinox, all of which will affect the Skalon raid in some way. 2 conjunctions are at the gathering lead to the shores of the Gullet along the western coast of Calavesa. Here, enterprising citizens are already laying down preparations for the raid, caulking small boats, fixing carts and unloading supplies already sent from Mead in preparation for the Marcher-led endeavour. The third involves engaging a Yatun patrol suspicious of the movement of Imperial captains that threatens the Skalon spy network. Steward's Landing. Yatun raiders threaten the staging post where boats to support the raid are being prepared. Driving off the orcs and concealing the staging post will allow Steward Jarvay Oddsboy to send their own warriors on the raid. The Civil Service suggests that Gregor, the Grand Master of the Shuttered Lantern, might organise such a mission. Steward's Landing lies close to Odd's End in Mitwald, on the opposite bank of the Gullet from the Calavesa West Marsh. Many small boats are being prepared there by fisherfolk along the southern banks of the shallow sea from Otterley to Mead. When the signal is given, they will help transport willing raiders north to the staging post near Westerhall. While preparations are taking place under utmost secrecy, such a large-scale endeavour is hard to conceal. The need to hide preparations has become more pressing as locals have observed a force of Yatun warriors coming ashore from Thrall Road ships to the salt flats on the edge of Bregasland. Jarvey Strong Oar Oddsboy, the steward of the small Marcher household who oversees Steward's Landing, needs the aid of Imperial heroes to fight off the orcs. He also requests the aid of a coven of magicians able to cast the Veil of Shadows to help conceal his fisheries, and consequently preparations for the raid, from the prying eyes of Yatun scouts and Brega's rebels alike. Success and failure. Successfully driving off the Yatun will prevent them learning of the preparations taking place at Steward's Landing, and allow the steward to send 500 strength of his own livery to support the raid. Driving the orcs away and performing the Veil of Shadows ritual on the steward will mean they are able to risk sending not only their soldiers, but those of several neighbouring farms and smaller households on the raid too, providing a total 1,500 strength. Failing to drive off the orcs or not shrouding Jarvey's holdings at Steward's Landing will mean he will feel the need to focus on defending their household while the raid is taking place, and they will not provide any additional warriors to support the attack on Skalon. Lanisipari Pines. A family of the Hilya are being troubled by Yatun orcs. If the orcs can be dealt with, the Hilya will be able to support the raid by providing assistance getting back over the border into the Empire. The Civil Service suggests that Ral Dunn, the mediator of Hilyahal, might organise such a mission. The Lanisipari Pines are a wood above the northernmost point of Lanisipari in Tanakapari, far to the rear of the Yatun forces in Samasuak and close to the Skalon border. Here, determined Suak hunters have made contact with a village of the Sealkin known as the Hilya. Since the invasion of the icy expanse by the Yatun, the inhabitants of the area have kept a low profile, surviving out of sight and avoiding rousing suspicions of a veteran Kirkland unit stationed nearby. On hearing of the planned raid and the turning of the war against the barbarians, the leaders of the community are quick to offer support, but on one condition. The Hilya here are skilled trackers and explorers, but their fighting force is limited. They are keen to avoid open confrontation with the Yatun and request that the Empire removes the threat to their village so that they can be free to offer support. A forceful attack would shatter the orcs, breaking their morale and driving them from the vicinity of the Sealkin's dwellings. Success and failure. Successfully driving off the orcs will free Hilya to support the Empire, not in the attack on Skalon, but in the aftermath. Along with their kin in other parts of Wintermark, they will provide escorts and winterborn aid to the military units returning from the raid. This will significantly reduce the loss of life and resources and lower the penalty suffered by Imperial military units in the wake of the raid by 1 rank. Starkmarsh. A band of Yatun orcs suspect the existence of the Skalon spy network. The orcs need to be eliminated if the spy network is to remain secret. The civil service suggests that Caleb, the Imperial spymaster, might organise such a mission. Along the northerly coast of Westmarsh is Starkmarsh, a particularly morose stretch of the Calavesa marches. A group of Navarre scouts, encouraged to help in Skalon by the National Assembly, provide a timely warning. A warband of Yatun warriors has crossed the border here in the wake of the last few military units supporting the Skalon spy network. The scouts believe that these Yatuns seem to have grown suspicious after sighting Imperial forces and tracked them back over the border to Calavesa. The Navarre are confident that they haven't actually captured any Imperial spies or discovered any concrete evidence for the existence of the spy network. If they are able to report their suspicions to the Yatun generals, however, it's certain that the Skalon spy network will go the same way the Hordaland spy network did. Worse, it will alert the Yatun to the fact the Empire is spying on them. Success and failure. Eliminating all the Orc warriors will prevent them alerting the Yatun generals to the presence of the spy network. The Yatun will not connect the Empire's raid to any espionage activity, meaning they will unlikely look for any spy network unless given significant additional cause. Ensuring the force includes some fleet-footed fighters able to chase down any stragglers would improve the likelihood of success. If more than 3 Yatun escape to share their suspicions, the Yatun will surely discover the existence of the Skalon spy network. They will take steps to locate and destroy it, but more importantly perhaps, the Jarl of Kierheim will warn his peers that the Empire is spying on the Yatun kingdoms. This will increase their level of alertedness, and it will become significantly harder to spy on the Yatun for the next year. The thresholds required for a successful spy report on a spy network in the Yatun territory, which currently includes Liathaven in the south, will be doubled. It is also possible that some Jarls may seek the aid of Night Eternals in shrouding their lands from magical scrying.